Hello there, and welcome to Successfully Depressed. And I'm your host, Kerry. This show is all about helping solopreneurs navigating mental and physical health in life and business. Today's guest is Erin Callinan. She holds a Master of Social Work from Arizona State University. She has 13 years of nonprofit leadership experience in the field of mental health, domestic violence, and sexual assault. She's the founder of Beneath the Brave, whose mission is to amplify workplaces, careers, and lives through strengthening mental health. Erin also is a nationally certified adult mental health first aid instructor. I want to welcome to the show, Erin. Hello there.
Hello, Kerry. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. We connected about a month ago, I would say. I took your mental health first aid course.
Right.
It was awesome. I told a lot of friends about it. I've actually even used a little bit of what I've learned already. For people that don't know about that, is the mental health first aid is basically, there's CPR for, first responders. But this is the idea of this for mental health and everything. Can you tell people a little bit about how this program works and how you got involved in it?
Absolutely. So mental health first aid is ultimately for the general population. It's a public education course, a national curriculum, and it's really meant for anybody in the community to learn how to identify early and worsening signs and symptoms of somebody who might be struggling with a mental health condition. And then it offers the tools of, what do we do about it? How can you step in? How can you listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance, and ultimately get folks connected to professional and self-help resources? So it's available to anybody and everybody. And just like you said, there's regular first aid and CPR training. And it would be fantastic if everybody was encouraged to also take mental health first aid. There you go, Kerry.
I'm holding up my certificate right there.
Yeah.
What I took away from the course is there's a lot to learn and everything, but it's not, we're obviously not experts in taking a 12-hour course, but just gives you, like you said, resources, information. It has the Algee method to assess the situation. Can you kind of go over the Algee method briefly?
Absolutely. I love that piece of this training because it makes it really easily accessible and easy to remember. So the Algee action plan is a 5-step plan. The A is educating folks how to assess a situation where somebody might need support and then approaching them. The L is listen non-judgmentally. So really meeting that person where they're at. The G is give reassurance and information. And then EE at the end stands for encouraging professional help and self-help resources. And so it's fantastic for folks to take this mental health first aid course because they walk away with an action plan that they can use in a variety of different situations. And so, folks don't have to have a specialized training or certification or work in the mental health field. It's really about giving people resources so that they can navigate conversations with strangers, neighbors, family, friends, coworkers, and they feel confident in knowing how to have those conversations. Like you said, it's not training somebody to be a therapist, a counselor. It's about having some basic tools to show up, support, and empower folks to get the help they need. And we get to kind of be that conduit as mental health first aiders.
Yeah, what I like about the Algee method is a simple approach. And so recently I had a friend that told me about someone that I know. I don't really know him that well, but his good friend was dealing with some type of mental health issues. And I was kind of asking him a few questions, and I sent him over the Algee method and a couple other resources that I thought would be helpful.
Awesome.
And I think that's where it's just kind of trying to be a connector for information, because that's what it really is, just like information and support. The other thing that I took away from the class was the non-labeling and basically kind of framing methodology. That's still even hard for me. I still have some work on that, but just from my perspective as someone that deals with anxiety, depression, I think I sometimes say stuff and I'm not trying to be rude or anything like that, but the way that you talk and everything. And so kind of thinking about, like, if someone's in a situation, not labeling them, talking to them as a person versus a diagnosis. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think you bring up such an interesting point, and we're all doing the best that we can, right? And learning about mental health and how to talk about it and reduce stigma, the language changes. And even those of us who are living with mental health conditions, like you said, can find ourselves in places where we go, oh, did we say the right thing? Did we, the goal really is, how do we bring people together, meet them where they're at, recognize that people are people first prior to a diagnosis. But I really encourage folks that I work with and just feel so passionately about, if we want mental health to be something that we feel safe and comfortable about, we have to have the tough conversations. And we have to be able to say, this is actually a better way to say this. Instead of saying, this bipolar person was on my podcast. No, it's Erin, who's a person living with bipolar disorder. And so I think if we can, one, give ourselves patience and grace that we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We can move on, learn from each other. But if we get too nervous about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, and we kind of tiptoe around the topic, we're never going to reduce stigma. And so language does play an really important part of that. One of the shifts that has been really big in the field over the last, 10 years or so is shifting away from, talking about somebody who committed suicide. Now, I used to say committed suicide. There's language that I used to use, and sometimes I still do. But, that really kind of places this ugly, stereotypy, judgmental tone around the conversation of suicide. So it's really best if we can shift that. And if somebody has taken their life, rather than saying committed suicide, we can say a person died by suicide. We're honoring that person, but we're also no longer associating their experience and their struggle as committed, such as a crime, committed a sin. So I think that's just one example of when we can remove some of these negative connotations, it makes it more comfortable. People feel more seen, more heard, and paying attention to language is important, but we have to be kind to each other and help educate each other in a way that recognizing we're all learning this together, right? We're all in this same space. At the end of the day, if we can just see people for who they are, ask what they need, meet them there, we're doing it, right? We're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In my experience, again, just kind of the way you phrase things, you're used to using certain words and you don't even know the meanings from the words. Like, especially nowadays with kind of how our culture is, you might say a certain word and people like, you don't say that. You don't know the meaning behind it and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I think the recent one I saw was in the press. I think Beyonce had, in one of her recent songs, she mentions the word spaz. And I guess that's actually an offensive word because it has to do with like spasms, like people with, is it cerebral palsy? I think for me, as like the word spaz, I didn't know that was an offensive thing. I thought it was someone that, you're kind of klutzy or something. So I think we also have to be careful too, not to jump to conclusions that people aren't trying to offend you necessarily. They don't maybe not know the meaning. But if someone's in a good mental health space, then they're going to take more of offense. And so that's where we have to, okay, this isn't about me. I need to kind of take a step back and kind of think about this. And one of the things I like about the class too is that if you're not in a good mental health space yourself, it's hard to help other people. Yeah. And I think that's really important. And that's why they have the worksheet.
Right. It's basically a self-care action plan, if you will.
Yes.
So we've got the action plan of here's what to do. Here's how you can kind of identify what next steps might be. But just as you said, we've got to take care of ourselves as well. Because if we aren't in a good space, we're not necessarily able to help other people. And so if we look at our lives from spiritual perspective, mental, physical, emotional, there's a lot, there's a lot of ways that we can take care of ourselves. And that's really important. That self-care is often hard to do because we get distracted. We're busy in our lives. And so many of us say, well, we don't have time. We don't have time. We don't have time. We do have time. We just have to find it and make time for that. And so the mental health first aid course also helps participants recognize, how do we know when we need to refuel? How are we checking in with our own mental health? Because we don't leave a mental health condition at the door when we show up at work or in relationships. And so people sometimes forget that we all have mental health, and we've got to check in on our own mental health. And so that's definitely a big piece of that mental health first aid course, is how are we taking care of our mental health? Are we seeking the services and supports? Because just like you said, if we step in and trying to support someone and we either meet them in their crisis, or it ends up being a really triggering experience for us, we've got to step back and think, maybe I'm not the right person. Who else can I bring in so that we can get this individual help?
Yeah, I think that's another good point. And as far as, the mental health first aid, the course is roughly 10 to 12 hours, depending on who you take it through. Is that right?
So the total course is an 8-hour course.
8-hour course, okay.
Delivered in person, virtually. And because of this course now being in a virtual space, there's an hour or two of pre-course work. And then with my trainings that I facilitate, it's 6 hours online. Once you take all of those 8 hours, either virtually or in person, that's when you receive your certificate. So you are a certified mental health first aider for the following 3 years.
Yeah, and I like the approach that you have because, every hour or so you're taking a short break, which kind of is nice because, it can be kind of heavy. And,
it's a lot, sure.
And honestly, for me, like I've been dealing with insomnia the last 6 months, and I did that class in an hour's worth of sleep, and that was intense. And
Very.
so
I would have never known you were on it.
Yeah, I had a little caffeine to help me out on it, but some parts of it, like the suicide part, was like a little bit more like real, and that's kind of where I talked about. That's like the graduate level stuff, and what I liked about it, you said, you can. If you need to walk away from stuff, you can, or you can, turn your video off. So I just kind of turned my video off because I kind of wanted to kind of be in my own little world. So that's the other thing. It's something you can take online, even if you're in a tough space. I mean, you can still make it happen if you believe in doing something to help yourself out and others out. That's kind of what the whole point of the course is, help yourself, help others.
Exactly.
And I know people can sign up through your courses through Beneath the Brave. I think the classes they around like $139, I want to say.
Yes, correct. And there is an early bird special. So if you sign up prior to 1 week within the training, you can take it for $119. Otherwise, the course is $139. And so that includes not only that pre-course access, but the live training as well as the mental health first aid materials.
Yeah, we'll have in the show notes, we'll have a link to your website where they can take the course and learn more about that. So now that we kind of got through that, I wanted to kind of now talk about kind of who you are and how you got to be where you are today. And I know that you've had your own challenges with mental health as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I certainly was one of those people who grew up in a fantastic home in Flagstaff, Arizona, and did not know about mental health conditions. I hadn't been impacted as a child or growing up. It's interesting when I look back in retrospect, I definitely had anxiety, but we didn't call it anxiety. It was like, I'm overwhelmed. I feel nervous. And, so it's kind of like that shifted a little bit. We didn't talk about mental health conditions, and I didn't know anybody living with a mental health condition. Again, in retrospect, absolutely. There's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 of us living with a mental health condition. But as I went throughout my teenage years, I had a manic episode when I was 17 and ended up being hospitalized, which, 22 years later, working in mental health, I'm so thankful to see the progress that has taken place. Yet there's still a lot of work, right? I mean, to this day, my first hospitalization is one of the most traumatic things that I've been through. I started my senior year of high school 4 days later, really over medicated, and felt this immense pressure of, I've got to fake it till I make it. I am humiliated There's no way anybody can find out. I'm damaged, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. And so had a difficult time almost kind of grieving the person that I knew myself to be and taking ownership eventually. It was kind of a hot mess for a little while, but then I got to the place where it's like, okay, if I were diagnosed with diabetes or an autoimmune disease, whatever, we'd go, here's the issue. How can I manage it? And what's the plan moving forward? And my family was very much like, okay, Erin, this is devastating for our family in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, it's like, we gotta do something. I didn't want to be victim to that. And so, after a couple of years and incredible psychiatrist, I did therapy. I started to learn that struggling with your mental health is not a death sentence. It doesn't last forever, at least the downside of it. And so I ultimately, got comfortable talking about it and sort of fell in love with stigma reduction and advocacy. So after college, I started my work in a domestic and sexual violence shelter and was just struck by the resilience of families and kiddos who could experience such tragedy and be strong and, just take ownership of their life. And so I ended up kind of spilling the beans in my career about living with a mental illness. And it was petrifying and scary. And then I found out so many other people were like, oh my gosh, me too. My brother, my mom, my cousin. And it was so comforting to be seen as Erin and some of these other experiences I'd been through. And so falling in love with advocacy and speaking out led me to write and publish my book, Beautifully Bipolar, an inspiring look at mental illness. Because I tell you what, when you Google mental illness, it can be petrifying, especially, in 2001. So I just kind of took the leap of faith and said, I'm willing to talk about it because it's what I need for my mental health. And I popped into the mental health field and the advocacy field, and here I am today. It's been several years, and I think the more that we have the courage to talk about it, the more we invite people into this club that says, hey, it's okay. Like, it's okay to not be okay. It's all right to struggle and still have a beautiful life.
What I like about that is that, you had your own experiences, then you opened up, which helps other people out because they're like, oh, I have that issue too, or I have my own issue, which I think, which is very helpful. And that's what I'm doing right now. That's kind of my whole kind of purpose of this podcast too, is to help myself out and others. And what I like is that then you wanted to help other people out, and, and working in those types of centers, that can be traumatic in its own right, because just the emotions that you can feel from what everyone's dealing with. But I like what you said in that you kind of learn lessons from them and how resilient that they are. From my perspective, I'm like, wow, that'd be really a tough job to do, especially if you're a person that has some type of mental health issue.
Right.
And like, is that going to make it worse or something almost? But it sounds like it was kind of a therapeutic thing. And then you were around other people and this kind of peer support system, and that we all need that sense of community. Writing a book is not easy, especially back then, but there wasn't as many resources. So how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always journaled. I've always loved to write. It was sort of this safe dungeon for me where I could be mad and pissed off and grateful and all of these things. And it was kind of this time capsule. And so when I first started writing the book, it was really from a place of anger, to be honest. It was from a place of, I'm tired of the labels. I'm tired of there was really no kind of access at that time to how do you get through this? It's like, here's all the terrible things that happen when you live with a mental illness. But there was but I don't want that to be my life. There's got to be other ways. And so I ultimately took many of those journals, and that sort of was the development of the book. And, it went from, I'm tired of the stigma, I want my voice to be heard, and I want other people's voices to be heard. And so, it was scary because I'm literally opening up my journal to the world, but it was one of the most cathartic things I had done. And it was useful in my healing to be able to total transparency. Here's the yuck of what my experience has been, but I'm okay. And things have been hard, but here's what worked for me. It may not work for you. We're all different. We have unique experiences, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's sunshine. And so, really being inspired by other people who had experienced so much pain that were also living these incredible lives. And just like you said, I didn't have experience working in that field, but I loved kiddos. My undergrad is in elementary education. So I thought, I'm going to work in this youth shelter. And during that interview, they ended up saying, well, we have more kiddos in the women's domestic violence shelter. And so that really was a lot of influence or passion for me to share my story. And the results were shocking. It's like, people might hate this, right? Nobody might read this. People may view me differently. Is this going to impact my career? People are going to find out this big, dirty secret of mine. And I have not had that experience. I mean, I'm sure there's people who maybe don't like it or didn't read it or don't care, and that's okay. But it has allowed me to connect with people that I wouldn't have otherwise met. And so I tell folks, if you've got a story and talking about it is what you want to do, go for it, because you never know how many people you can influence and support. And in turn, literally writing and publishing a book it helped me heal. It helped remind me of why taking care of myself is so important, because living with a mental illness isn't easy. So surrounding yourself by some other people like you who are like, yeah, I get it. I've been there, and things can be tough, and that's okay.
That's okay. I like that kind of phrase. And that's something I've been kind of learning more about, just to talk to people like you and counselor and reading. And recently I interviewed a friend that the interview is going to come out next week. And we were talking about the chrysalis time, where the caterpillar is in the cocoon and before it becomes a butterfly, and it's in this kind of transitional stage. Sure. And that's okay. You don't need to say it's good or bad. And for me, I would also be like, oh, I'm in this bad space, or I'm in this space. But it's you're in this space. It's, that's what it is. Own it. Don't say it's good or bad. Just own it. So you kind of, you do this brave thing. You publish the book. You put some, the good vibes out there, and good vibes come back to you. And then from that, you kind of, in your career, you kind of moved along. And what different places do you work out after that?
So I was born and raised in Flagstaff. So I was at the domestic violence shelter there for 3 years, and then moved down to Phoenix and ended up working for an organization where I was the director of domestic violence initiatives, and was able to work a continuation of working with survivors. But then I was also I did training all around the country and partnering with victim advocates and law enforcement. And I started to really not only fall in love with the importance of knowledge and education, but getting involved in some legislative advocacy. How do we make sure that, state senators and representatives hear the challenge and some of the struggles that everyday families face? And so I was able to ultimately shift out of that and then move into mental health full time. And so I was the executive director of Mental Health America of Arizona for a bit, and was able to continue some of that legislative advocacy alongside families. One specific family had lost their son to suicide, and went from we're mom and dad and we don't want this to ever happen again. And they just started knocking on doors at the Capitol. And it was so inspiring. And they ended up, basically passing an incredibly large piece of legislation called Jake's Law in honor of their son. And it was a pivotal moment. So I wanted to fully invest my time and life and energy in mental health. And it ultimately led me to starting my own business so that we could have real, honest conversations for and with folks outside of the system. So I'll give you an example. Something I struggled with, I was fortunate in that as I, had my first episode, my family, we had insurance. And so my family was able to pay for services. But there were some limitations throughout my life because I didn't qualify for some of the community-based services that would have been really beneficial for me. And so, I wanted to be able to talk about those things freely and kind of off the record, that let's talk about real life, real people, and have real talk, real conversations. And so that's when I ultimately, took the leap with a lot of support and love from people in my life and left my profession in nonprofit, which was all that I knew, and, started my own company. And it has been, one of those experiences where I think anybody, regardless of having a mental illness, goes, oh my gosh, can I do this? What if I fail? And it was like, well, you might fail, but fail forward. And that's kind of the trajectory of how I've come to this place. And, we'll see where it takes me next.
Well, yeah, it's hard when you start something, you have that imposter syndrome and is this, is this going to be real? But what I liked about what you've done is I think if you build something around passion and not your ego, but you look at it as a passion, then it's something that's going to come to fruition. It's something that you're going to, be happy truly doing versus, working for others sometimes isn't the right fit. And that's part of this podcast too, is just talking about, for businesses, getting people to find what they're passionate about and taking that step to launch it, get that momentum going, but then also being healthy in their expectations. Like even with launching this podcast, I was like, oh, it's going to be this huge thing. And I was in a grandiosis, and I kind of went into that, my default mode, let's blow this thing up. And then I was like, okay, I need to really take this back and just have fun with it. And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so that's why I have podcast episodes every other week, just so it gives myself, the amount of time to, have relaxation and other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, for you starting that business, I think what's great is that you had your own personal experience with mental health. Then you professionally work for nonprofits, so you're in that world. You traveled around, so you got an idea. So you have a very interesting perspective. Then from there, you're like, I have this idea, and I need to kind of do it on my own, just kind of my own kind of way of thinking and everything I've learned. And then you went for it. And so I think I was excited. Anytime I have friends that want to do something, even if it's like a hobby or a side hustle, whatever, I'm always so encouraging. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And it excites me because I'm like, just go for it. Because if you don't try things out in life, you're going to regret it. And so that's where I think, some people want to have a safe job for 30 years, and that's totally fine. Everyone's different. And there's some great things with that. And being an entrepreneur, obviously leads to, even if you have mental health issues, it's a wild ride. So it makes it more of a challenge. So that's great that you did that. Can you tell us a little bit about the consulting you do for businesses, that you help them kind of educate them about mental health, how that works?
Yeah, definitely. I, was really inspired by some of the mentors that I had in my life, where they supported me in being able to be open and honest in my workplace. But there's also the opposite side of that, where that is not always the experience. And I've had some negative experiences along the way where, there's that fear of what are the pros and cons of disclosing having a mental health condition in the workplace. What about accommodations? Do I qualify? And for me, a lot of it was like, do I deserve that? I'm doing very well and I've been successful in my career. Am I deserving of accommodation? Is it okay for me to say I don't know what I'm doing? And sometimes I found that it was leadership that maybe didn't always have those tools to talk about mental health or how to best support employees. And I, wanted to change that, and had learned a lot from, the previous organizations that I had worked with. So I created a course, and it's called Leading from the Top. So if we're going to create cultures where workplaces focus and care about mental health from a prevention perspective, it's got to start at the top. And so this Leading from the Top training is ultimately seven to 9 modules. And it's for companies and corporations from a leadership perspective. How can HR, how can CEOs, how can supervisors best support employees? And what does that look like? What are some of their legal obligations? As well as for employees. How can we advocate for ourselves and, talk about stigma, let folks know what we need? So the Leading from the Top training is kind of an overview of what can employers do, kind of like I said, from that prevention perspective, that if I go and apply for a job and in their interview, they make mention of, mental health and self-care is a big part of our company because we want all of our employees to feel healthy, supported, and valued. What do you do for self-care? Like I would celebrate for that question to be on every interview. And
Yes.
so, that's what I mean by that preventative piece. If that's already included up front in the interview, then in onboarding, and then but really when, challenges come up where employees need support, which is all of us, especially over the last many years, this course is really about what do you do from there and, keep people working and supporting them. And it takes a lot of work to do that and investment. And, as an individual with a mental illness, I think there's fear in what are my rights and can I lose my job? And so that was really sort of the reason behind why I created that course.
What would be maybe a couple examples of maybe what a module is and covers?
Great. Yeah. So, a couple different examples. There's sort of, some companies will bring me on to do consulting for kind of a general overview of what is the prevalence of mental health conditions? What are some of the things that you can look for in the workplace that might indicate a staff member needs support? And then there's modules about, having the conversation. What are things that you can not only ask an employee, what are things you cannot ask, but how do you have a conversation about them being an employee and being successfully employed that's not about their mental health, but it's about their job performance and what can be done to support them. So is it, amplifying and boosting up employee assistance programs? There's some modules that are specifically for leadership that talk about how do you create an employee resource group? How do you modify accommodations? What's documentation that's needed to request accommodations? So it can go from some modules are sort of general about here's how to have the conversation, here's how we reduce stigma, and here's how to check in on your coworkers, all the way to upper management. How do you evaluate, feedback from your team about if they're getting the support that they need to do their job and do it well?
And so basically the modules all in like self-guided online type course. Is that what that is?
So this specific course is I facilitate live. So I do it virtually or in person. So some companies want one of the 9 modules and we just deliver kind of a one and done. So it's not, you don't have to start at module 1 and bring me on for all 9 modules. I really want to get a sense of what each company needs, meet them there, and they pick which modules they think best fit. So it can be delivered in a variety of ways. All of the modules are 1 hour in person or virtual, and you can have up to 100 people attend each module. So I wanted it to be fluid in that it's not, completely stuck to what is involved in each module. Here's the learning objectives. for this module. Companies can, be fluid in that, but you can do one module, you can do 9 modules. The hope is that the conversations will continue. Research supports that one and done 60-minute trainings does not shift culture. So it's about preparing companies to continue in this conversation and really implement, like I said, employee resource groups, implement ongoing training, implement, things that increase the effectiveness and job performance of everybody that works there.
That's great. I've taken like diversity training before, and I haven't done anything in mental health space before, but do you teach a class too that like all employees can take too in the company?
Yeah.
That's part of it too. Oh, great.
Yep. Anybody can take it. So, I did a couple courses last month for a large insurance group. One of the courses we separated out and we had the entire team, all employees attend. And then we had another session for supervisors. It was helpful because that sort of allowed space for everybody to be a little more authentic, as opposed to, oh my gosh, my boss is right here in this training with me. But the courses are open to absolutely anybody in any work, place, in any workplace or company where you really want to prioritize mental health and get the steps and the tools for actually doing that.
I like that because, some places they may say that they're supportive of mental health, but they're not, I would say. Like, it's just kind of a check mark, on a box on a list or whatever.
Yeah.
And, but to really have it built in and then have something like this, the diversity training that I did, we had like breakout sessions and stuff on like Zoom. Mm-hmm. And so we got to kind of talk about like our perspectives on everything too, which was nice because that's the one thing, theory is great and all, but if you're not practicing it, then you kind of forget about it. So the next thing I want to talk, and this is something that I am very interested in learning more about, is in my own experience, I've worked at some different companies where there wasn't any really support for mental health. I had no idea where to talk to people. I even did some searches online and I still didn't know what I was doing. And so what are resources for people that, are dealing with mental health and they're working for an employer and they're kind of scared on, who to talk to, what to bring up, should they even do it or not? So what are some steps that you would suggest for that?
Sure. So, there's a few different things. One, the EOC is always incredibly helpful. It's good for people to know that you can't be fired. Well, let me rephrase that. It's illegal to be fired because of your mental health condition. You have the right to request accommodations, but figuring out, like you said, well, how do I do that and where do I start? So I would encourage people, you can go to the OC website and get a better understanding of what your rights are. So one of which, if you have a mental health condition that's been diagnosed, you are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The challenge I think sometimes that happens though, is your workplace is not required to provide accommodation if they don't know that there's a medical issue. So there's that, do I disclose? Do I not disclose? There's some great mental health peer education organizations that I think can offer great tools. One of which is NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And they're a peer and family national organization. And they have great resources to help people really learn about advocacy. And so I always encourage people with lived experiences and their families to visit NAMI. Mental Health America is also a national organization that has really helpful tools, not only about workplace, but kind of generally, how do we advocate for ourselves? So I would recommend, EOC, NAMI, MHA, and finding out what is the culture of the company. I like, Kerry, that you mentioned, some companies are like, we really care about mental health, but that doesn't really translate. And so what if a company did a, across the board anonymous survey about how they feel? How is mental health talked about in that company? Does the company hire people with known mental health conditions? How do they respond? And then taking that information and actually putting it to use and tracking trainings that are done, tracking outcomes. using data to actually shift the culture. And so if folks don't know, am I protected? Do I have to tell my employer? Well, one, you are protected, and no, you don't have to tell your employer. I think that the best resource would certainly be the EOC. They also have information about how to file a grievance. If you've experienced discrimination, how do you find your local entity within your state to make a complaint, to file that charge?
It's interesting because I never really thought of mental health as a disability because I'm like, it's always been like, you have to, tough it out is always what I've had in my mentality. And I always think about people with disabilities, maybe they're in wheelchairs or they're blind or, different things like that. But then I started thinking about that. I'm like, wow, this actually is a disability. It makes life a lot harder. Yeah. And so if I'm not even thinking it's a disability, then how are others people going to think it's a disability?
Yeah,
so
you're not alone. I didn't think it was a disability. I didn't view it that way. And I didn't know that I could request accommodations. I knew I could do it when I was in college. I got involved in the Disability Resource Center, which, just as you mentioned, because from the outside, you couldn't physically see that I was living with a disability. It was like I always had to prove myself. Like I would give my professors like my accommodation, and which was really, I needed additional time on tests, and I needed additional excused absences so I could remain in treatment. If I was doing medication changes, sleep was really hard. And as you mentioned, insomnia, it's really hard to function when you don't sleep. But it was like, from the outside, they were like, but what is this for? But why? And, obviously that was really challenging. But in the workplace, I didn't know that I was covered under the ADA if I had a diagnosed mental illness. I had no clue. So I think you bring up a great point that many of us, I don't think, maybe view it in that way, or view that we do have access to certain resources if we ask for them.
It's really interesting. I had this happened to me a couple different times recently. People I've talked to, someone that I was on his podcast recently, became friends recently, and he was interviewing me. He's like, "You're this upbeat guy. I would never know. And you've done a lot of interesting things in your life. I would never have thought." And I said, I kind of call it the great actor. Like maybe I should be an actor. That's why a lot of people are probably actors and performers, because you get really good at hiding things and putting a certain face on. And so that's just something in my mind that's kind of popped in my head that kind of relates to this, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because that's literally why I named my company Beneath the Brave, because there's so much pressure to have that brave face, right? To pull yourself up out of your bootstraps and fake it till you make it. And wearing that mask, as you know, is so exhausting. But it also kind of, in society, I think, shows that if you're struggling or if you live with a mental health condition, it's obvious, and you're wearing that on your face. You're the person in the corner in the puddle. Well, are we sometimes the person in the corner in the puddle? Yes, but you can't look at somebody and see if they're living with a mental health condition. So it's like, if we can take off that brave face and get beneath it and make it okay to be however we are and not have to feel the pressure to, wear that mask, I think we can make some good progress there.
That's great. I didn't realize that was the meaning behind that. It's cool. And there's, it's also just hard to choose a business name because everything's taken, so that's part of it too. You're like, oh, I love this name. And
yeah.
And so that's great. There's actually a lot of meaning behind it, and sometimes people just have a name because they're like, oh yeah, we just like combined some different words together. We invented our own name. There's like no meaning behind it, but
Yeah. When I first started consulting work, I was like, I'll be Callinan Consulting. And then I'm like, wait, nobody can say or spell my last name. So you got to scratch that. And, when you do work that you care so passionately about, I thought it was important to have representation about, why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And just kind of a couple other points with getting back to, if you're working for a company and you're trying to deal with mental, or talked about your mental health and everything, are there certain reasonable accommodations that you could speak to? Is that something you know much about, or?
Absolutely. So anybody can request a reasonable accommodation. Oftentimes, you might have to tell your employer, and provide medical documentation that you're living with a mental health condition, but they're obligated to approve and honor that reasonable accommodation as long as it doesn't create some significant financial barrier. So some examples of that might be changing your schedule. So if you're finding, for example, living with that insomnia and your work schedule is from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., you may not be able to perform your job functions well and be successful because of that. So you might request a shift in your schedule. You might request to have every Tuesday from 11 to 12 off so that you can go see your therapist. Maybe it's a shift in where you're physically located. If you work in the bullpen and there's a lot of noise and distraction and people moving about, can you request to, work in a different part of the office where there's a little bit more space? I think sometimes people think a reasonable accommodation or the requesting it, you have to, really be like on the edge of losing your job. You have to wait till it gets so bad to request this big thing. It doesn't need to be that way.
It's the opposite.
It's totally the opposite. It's like ask early, figure out what you need and have no shame in asking. There's also not this big scary process for requesting. If you recognize that maybe your current job duties, you are, whether it's medication or therapy, or you're just living with the overwhelm of life and kids and family, maybe you're asking to have a shift in those job duties, that you're going to take these 2-3 things off your plate. You're going to be able to delegate that. And then you're going to revisit this with your supervisor in 3 months. To ask for that accommodation, you just ask for that accommodation. Go to your supervisor or your HR, whoever that identified professional is, and let them know what you need. So they really can be these simple things that impact you so, significantly. So you think about what would help you do your job well, because if you're struggling with your mental health and the frequency of that struggle is getting worse, it's getting more intense. As you mentioned, you may not view yourself as someone living with a disability, which is fine. That doesn't matter one way or the other. But if your mental health is impacting your ability to do your job and be healthy and able to be productive, you deserve that accommodation. And those things can be, like I said, a change in your schedule, moving places in the office, delegating. Those are all things that people, even living without mental health conditions, find themselves in needing to shift those priorities. Maybe I think that's asking for more check-ins from your supervisor.
I think that, in my experience too, that is kind of that whole kind of toughness thing too. We're like, oh, I'm going to deal with that. And you're like, this is really, really tough. And I should have talked to Erin like a year ago, but she would have given me some good suggestions. But I just think for me in the past, I was at a job and I didn't ever had any time to myself. It's like inbound, like you always have to answer the phone, and I was running a department, and it was just like, I need some time to do my own things and breathe a little bit. So
sure.
If it's not benefiting you to be in this tough mode and ignoring the signs, because then it only gets worse. So right. I think those are some great points.
I just want to mention too, even something, anybody can and should. If you need support in doing your job, you should be able to talk to your supervisor about that. And like you said, needing some space, needing some time. It might even be, we live in this culture where you're supposed to work all the time, always be accessible. It might even be just really creating boundaries around that, or having your supervisor communicate with you in writing, maybe via email, maybe text is better for you, so that, you can do your job. And maybe if you're not sleeping and you're not doing great, it's hard to remember maybe what happened in those conversations. So, I'm glad you brought that up, because there are just simple things that people can do. You don't have to wait for a crisis to let your supervisor know what you need.
Yeah, and sometimes you're working in a place that's a great culture, and when you have those great cultures, it's way easier to talk to people, because you just feel so open and so supportive and everything. So when you're in those organizations that aren't, that's where it gets really tricky. And that's where there's not any special way of doing things, no magic pill to take, What would be some suggestions for kind of figuring out who this person should talk to, whether it's HR, a manager, even peers, kind of that support system?
Yeah. I think it's really about what you need. If you can talk to a colleague that, you feel safe, you feel comfortable with, you have a rapport with, that might be all you need. And maybe between the two of you, you come up with, hey, they're going to check in on you. Maybe you say, hey, so for example, presenteeism is something that a lot of people experience where I got to be at work. So I show up to work, but I'm not really there. I'm not really present. And so you might talk to a coworker and you say, man, I'm really struggling to focus. It's hard for me to stay on task. It's hard for me to maybe remember things. So the accommodation or that conversation, they could say, hey, I'll check in on you in the mornings. Why don't we have a 5-minute check-in of going down the list of what you're going to work on today? If you don't feel confident or comfortable doing that, or maybe that wouldn't actually give you the change that you need or give you the support that you need, go to your supervisor. Not everybody has that supportive supervisor though. So there might be that con or the pro of disclosure. If you disclose to your supervisor and you're up for a promotion in a week, even though this shouldn't be the case, it's very realistic that them knowing could influence their decision. Will they see you as an accountable candidate for that promotion? So, it really goes back to the person. Do they feel comfortable talking to a supervisor, or might it be going to HR? I think HR gets a bad rep because there's this assumption of like, you only go to HR when, you're in trouble or something terrible happened. But HR, I think nationally, with a lot of training and bringing mental health to the forefront, they should have access to resources, whether that's through the employee assistance program. They should have local and national resources of who you can call and talk to confidentially. And HR has to hold what you share with them in confidence. So you could, you don't have to go to your supervisor. You could go straight to HR to talk to them about what you need. And they cannot share that information even with other coworkers. So that should be a safe place to go and talk about maybe what your experience is. It's fluid, it changes, it depends on the company. I wish, like you said, there was this magic pill or this one way that all companies functioned. That's just not the case. So trust your gut, connect with some peer services or mental health companies who can help you, create that dialogue or how to have that conversation. As you talked about earlier, the Leading from the Top program, folks can reach out to me. I can, with or without the training, pass along resources. But, realistically, HR should be your go-to.
I really like that. I appreciate that information because it's something that I'm trying to learn more about, and it's not an easy thing to do. And what I've done in the past too is sometimes maybe I'll like write an email, but I won't send it, and just because I want to get my thoughts out, and then I'll have my wife look at it or something, or
Smart.
If it's something I want to send, because she's very, very logical. And so I think sometimes that is helpful too, is if you have someone close to you that can look at it from a more logical and not emotional perspective.
Yeah, give yourself some time and space.
Yeah, just think it over and everything. Those are all really good things for the workspace. I think the whole kind of diversity training is changing, in America, and mental health it's slowly getting on the radar there, but it's great that people like you are instructing businesses that there are opportunities. And I think it's, for a lot of people, it could be a great recruiting tool. If you're someone, mental health challenges, and just because you have mental health challenges, a lot of us are highly functioning and stuff still, but we just have some additional challenges we have to go through. So if we find companies that actually have a support system, you want to work there, and hopefully it's a longevity thing for both parties and everything.
Yeah.
Any other topics that come to mind that you think would be good to cover? I think we really hit all the major points that I wanted to cover today, but anything else you can think of?
The only other thing that I'll mention, like you brought up, sometimes folks who are high functioning tend to be overlooked. And it seems, I go back and forth with this and, have dealt with some insecurities in the past of, do I have to wait till I'm really, really struggling? Do I have to wait till I'm really sick to go, hey, I need help, I need support? Those that are high functioning kind of slip under the radar a little bit. And so one thing that I will mention, I'm really excited about, I just recently launched a Amplify Your Life masterclass, and it's ultimately for peers, for anybody who has struggled with their mental health. And it's ultimately a shortcut to learning how to advocate for yourself. It's sort of this compilation of, here's what I learned by going through it and learning the hard way oftentimes. Here's what I've taken from my profession, from getting my master's, but it's for anybody who's lived with a mental health condition, struggled in the past or present, and you want to learn how to set boundaries. What should you share with your mental health provider? Exploring maybe taking medication. What might services look like? How do you ask for help? How do you tell people what you need? And so I'll offer that up as a potential resource if folks might be interested. You can find information on my website, but it is a 7-module online self-paced demand course. So folks can log in. It's $97. You have access to that course for as long as you want it. And it comes with a 70-page workbook. So this is like, if you're committed, you want to make some change, you want to really amplify your life, this might be a great course for you.
That's great. I like it's approachable with how you built it, as well as the price point. And then also having the theory, the practice versus just theory. I read a lot of things, but then you don't always practice it. You don't always remember how these things work. So to actually put something together, because you can read books forever, you can try things forever, but if you don't fully commit to it and do the hard work, it's not going to truly benefit you. Yeah. So we'll have notes to that in our show notes and promote it on the show when we promote it online and everything. I think that's a great resource. I want to thank you for your time today. Lots of good nuggets of information. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I so appreciate it, Kerry. I want to thank you, the work that you're doing and your willingness to have these conversations and be vulnerable is so inspiring and so impactful. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Congratulations. This podcast is incredible.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. It's been a challenging year, and this has been kind of part of my therapy, if you will. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
They can find me online, my website, beneaththebrave.com. They can also pop over, find me, Erin Callinan, on LinkedIn. And you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under Beneath the Brave.
Perfect. Well, as I always end the show, remember you're not alone in life or business.